This choir podcast is brought to you by the story of Christianity told as good news for all. A few weeks ago in church, we sang about the reckless love of God, how it chases me down, fights till I'm found, saves the 99. This song, this chorus, perfectly sums up my little book, The Story of Christianity Told as Good News for All. You can get it at Amazon today, and thanks for listening.
Western Christianity has spent the last 2,000 years telling everyone they're separated from God.
This is Not Church with John and Nat Turney and Bethany Shea.
Ready, ready, ready. I'm ready, ready, ready to rock and roll. Yeah, that's what you get. That's what you don't just get you just don't get a co-host. You also get a musical intro of sorts when the mood strikes and when the spirit moves me, as it were. Anyway, all that being said, we have an awesome guest who's coming back. This is so. Hey, John and Bethany, think about this. We managed to not run somebody off. And it took us 2 years to get him back. But because I didn't realize how long it had been, Dana, I was like,
it's been 2 years.
It doesn't seem like that long. And then I went back through our archives and like, oh, December 2022 is when we released, which means we recorded it probably 2 or 3 months before that. So, man, it's been longer than I thought. Long enough for you to have written a new book, which is amazing. Yeah. But long enough also that I should read this bio. So we refamiliarize folks with Dana Robert Hicks, who is an Amazon best-selling author, public theologian, and ecclesiastical disruptor, which I still love that. I love that. I like the word disruptor anyway. Yeah. So an ecclesiastical disruptor sounds amazing. Whose writings revolve around the themes of culture, change, and spirituality. For over 30 years, he served as a church planter, pastor, university professor, and leadership developer. He now calls Phoenix, Arizona home, where he likes to golf, ride his road bicycle, find the perfect Mexican food, and obsess a little bit too much about the National League Championship Arizona. So really?
They're no longer the National League champions.
That bio needs updating.
That really dates the bio, doesn't it? Yes.
The former National League champion Arizona Diamondbacks. He is the president of the Open Table Network and progressive network that ordains faith leaders so they can be people of love within communities of love. And his new book is called The Quest for Thin Places: How to Find Spirituality After Deconstruction. And so I don't know. Maybe you can start out by letting me know how much of that bio is no longer true.
The Diamondbacks had a disappointing season. That's the main difference. Yes,
that is true. The Giants did too. So we're all in really good company.
Well, the National League West was a very tough division.
It was, year. And it's not going to get any better.
No, I mean, next year is going to be just as difficult for sure.
Sadly, the Dodgers are going to be a force to be reckoned with, and I hate the Dodgers. And if it's not them, the Padres are going to sneak up on you and scare you. So we can at least we can commiserate over the fate of our baseball teams anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. Maybe if you wouldn't mind, just kind of give us a clue what you've been up to for the last couple of years, and then let's talk about your book, man.
Yeah. Well, professionally, I took a job at a nonprofit. I'm the chief operating officer. I just more or less make the trains run on time. But I like to tell people that I get to do Jesus work, and they pay me a lot better than the church ever did. So it's a great deal. And
that's a low bar, though. You know. I mean,
that's true. Not many people go into the nonprofit world to get rich, for sure.
No, for sure.
But we do great stuff. We do a lot of things with foster kids and poverty alleviation and literacy and some really cool programs that we do. And I feel really good about it when I come home at night and just kind of focus on being Jesus' hands and feet. Although we don't use that language, so it's pretty fun.
Why don't you use that language? Are you maybe non?
No, I mean we don't use it in our professional context.
Okay, I was curious. So
we're not a faith-based organization. But,
whoa! Hold up, hang on.
Theologically speaking, we're a very spiritual organization, but and are doing Jesus work, but we wouldn't call ourselves that.
Wow, I find it hard to believe that people who are not necessarily professing Christians do charitable work. I just don't think that. Oh, wait a minute. No, it's the other way around. My bad. I apologize.
Oh,
That's one of the things that, that began to drive my own, for lack of a better term. I know deconstruction is one of those words that we talk about a lot, about whether or not it's been overused or whatever. But when I started to recognize Jesus more and more and more in people who did not necessarily profess faith in Jesus, and I started to see it less and less and less in those who supposedly did. And I started to wonder, like, okay, I don't know how long I can hang out in this deal, because every time you bring up Jesus's words, even some of these people, they yell woke, or they get all mad and they call you a socialist. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I all of that was obviously the first part. That was very tongue in cheek, right? I think it's awesome that there are just people who maybe that. May I ask you this question: Do you find sometimes that there's a difference with people who are doing good out of the kindness of their heart and purely out of sort of altruism, versus maybe some people are motivated by, well, because the Bible says I should, and because my morality kind of, and almost grudgingly do some of that work.
Yeah, they don't want to go to hell or something.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, completely. Yeah. I think the conversations are a lot different. As you're talking, I was thinking about, I did, what got me into the nonprofit world, I was part of a nonprofit that did some economic development stuff in Africa. And we were technically, all these churches were involved in it, but we technically weren't faith-based. But one of the things we discovered in the country of Rwanda, where we did work, was that if you want to start a church in Rwanda, you have to apply to the government to get a church permit, essentially. And in order to get the permit, you have to fill out on the application, this is the way in which my church is going to help my community. And you have to put in there, in order to get approved, how it is your church is going to make a difference in your community and make your community better. And I thought that's not all bad. I think that's
not at all.
I kind of like that, but.
Yeah. I'm not a big proponent of the government getting involved in
right. Yeah, it's kind
religion, but
yeah.
I've also been a part of too many churches who were granted, a tax exempt status and literally contributed nothing. I mean,
yeah, and I think,
let me take that back. Outside the four walls of that church, they didn't do, I'm sure the people who attended church there, and we all felt like they contributed something to us personally, but I never understood why they were exempted from taxes, because, supposedly they were charitable, and to my knowledge, they just weren't. And there was nobody there enforcing or having any kind of oversight to see, hey, where are our tax dollars going? Essentially, or the taxes we're not collecting from you, we can count as a cost.
Right.
What is that getting us?
Or the property taxes for local organizations. Yeah.
Well, yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could go off on this tangent for a long time, for sure. A good chunk, the vast majority of charitable dollars in the U.S. do not go to nonprofits that alleviate poverty or human suffering. The vast majority go to churches and to institutions of higher education, to colleges and universities. So, when you're doing the work we're doing, we have 45,000 homeless people in our county, and so we look at that, and then all 80% of charitable dollars are going to places like churches and universities, and you're just like, why? I mean, I don't get it,
Yeah.
But
wow.
What was it
tough.
like? Because you were a pastor for a long time. How did you feel that out when you were a pastor? Did you ever feel like that tension between where your budget, where the money was going, and how it was going out?
Oh, all the time. And in fact, the last church I pastored, it was a church plant, and we were trying to experimental with different things, and it became really clear that you got to raise a lot of money to hire a full-time pastor, and I mean, not just a pastor, but have a building and all the things that you would think. And we calculated we needed at least 225 to 250 people to do that, which is larger than most churches are in the U.S. Long story short, we got to the end of our life and realized that we were running out of money and we weren't sure what else to do. And if we didn't have to pay a pastor, we could do a heck of a lot of really cool things. So really what we ended up doing at the end was I said, I'm going to go get a secular job And we're just going to take the money that we are taking in tithes. We're going to become like a house church movement. Anything you guys were contributing to the church, I want you to start pooling that together. And then you guys as a group, your little house church, you decide what to do with that money. If you want to dig a well in Africa, if you want to pay the rent for your neighbor, single mom who can't afford it, whatever you want to do, you guys find a need and meet it in the community. And we can do a lot of really cool things that way. And so I've been aware of this tension for a while in terms of the way churches spend money and what they spend it on. And, the reality is that we have a professional clergy class that it makes it really hard it's very hard to sustain financially. And so it requires a lot of money. And a building, a $5 million facility that you use for 3 hours a week, it takes a lot of money to maintain. And, so yeah, now that I'm in the nonprofit world, there's a lot of eye rolling about that kind of stuff in terms of what they do, because we're held to a lot of accountabilities for outcomes. We get a grant, we have to measure everything we do and show that the grantor, their money was well spent, it was worth the money. Churches aren't held to that. Obviously, they just kind of spend it whatever they want. And so, yeah. Anyway,
well, we planted a church several years ago, and I just never did go through the hoops of actually getting my tax exempt status. So, I just
For real?
Yeah, we never did. I'm like, I don't know. It's just a lot of work, a lot of paperwork. And, as I've admitted many times on this podcast, I was terrible at fundraising. I was just awful. And it's not my DNA. And so I'm like, if people gave, they gave. And then we just used that money to pay. We used it to pay rent. And we used it to offset some expenses, but nobody took a paycheck because there wasn't enough money coming in for that. We all had jobs, and I liked it. I liked the model of it because I don't think there's a lot of pastors, in America who can stand in their pulpit on Sunday and walk away going, oh, dang it, I forgot to ask for money. Again.
Literally every freaking Sunday, I forget to ask for money. Every freaking Sunday.
Well, what sucks is when I did remember, people donated. So
I know.
It wasn't like there wasn't enough incentive there. The handful of times we actually got money in the offering box was times I was like, oh, hey, by the way, and we didn't pass a plate because I feel like that puts pressure on people and makes giving somewhat compulsory. You know what I mean? Nobody wants to be the guy that passes the plate, right? So I'm like, I put a box in the back of the church, and I just would occasionally go, hey, by the way, there is the box in the back. If you feel like supporting what we're doing, that'd be great. No pressure. And on those Sundays, they'd be like, oh, damn, there's money in the box. And then for like 2 months afterwards, I'd be like, I forgot to mention it. There'd be no money in the box. I'm like,
well, I pastor 2 churches because there's no way that you can be a pastor of a full-time church nowadays. It seems like in a lot of different places. So I'm curious, Dana, what was it like for you to step away from a paid position as a pastor? Did you step away from the whole ministry altogether, or were you helping lead a small house church while also working in a regular job?
Kind of all of the above. I started working a regular job, and it was the first time in 30 years I had a job outside of the church. It was really disorienting for me, but. And I was still running a house church, quote unquote. There was a small group essentially. We meet once a week, so it wasn't like a lot of work. I mean, it wasn't any more work than a layperson would have done to run a small group. But eventually, to add context, this is just as COVID is hitting. Then all this kind of happened, and once COVID hit, it kind of killed everything. In terms of like people didn't want to meet publicly. Everyone was really freaked out at first, and it's like they don't want to sit in a living room with a bunch of people they weren't sure where they had been. And so COVID kind of killed the whole thing, which is probably fine. I'm fine with it at this point. And then I moved to Phoenix. So, I kind of moved away from all that. So
this kind of correlates with some stuff you talk about in your book, because we're talking about this idea of deconstruction and kind of quote unquote leaving the faith in some way, shape, or form. And can you still have a moral compass? Because that's part of the book that you talk about. And I actually wrote down a quote because I really liked it that you had written. It says, "People who have deep spiritual experiences see themselves as interconnected to the entire human race and are concerned about the future and our planet are more motivated to live ethical lives than people who can recite the 10 Commandments? Because that's one of the questions that I feel like was asked by you, right? Or that people were asking of you or about people who are deconstructing is like, well, how do you, if you aren't afraid of, hellfire and damnation anymore, how do you have any kind of moral compass? How did you respond to those kinds of questions?
Yeah. And I think, for my particular context, like I left ministry and had a few things fall apart in my life and moved to Phoenix to kind of start new and fresh. And in the midst of that, I left behind a community, and it was pretty disorienting for me because, I wasn't in the same community that I pastor anymore. Nobody knew me as a pastor, which was really nice, which I really liked. And then I had, for the first time in my life, I had the freedom to ask questions that I had never asked before. And so I began to explore and met people and that opened my eyes and to new experiences and new ideas and new ways of thinking. And I think that was really helpful. And like what I heard Nat, you and others have said too, one of the things that I think if you grow up in that evangelical bubble, you sort of have this warped sense that, hey, once I get outside this bubble, everyone's going to be a bunch of assholes, and they're all selfish and concerned about themselves, and everybody wants to sin. They can't wait to sin.
Just can't wait.
Yeah, I can't wait till 5 o'clock and I get off work and I can sin, But then you find out that's not true. It turns out people are actually kind and loving and gracious and doing the best they can, in spite of their circumstances. And so, I discovered some of that too. I mean, I wasn't that much in the bubble, but yeah, it becomes really interesting when you get outside of those silos, how your world really can kind of open up.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's like an arrogance that happens in Christian bubbles. Oh my gosh, I know. And it's like we're trained to be arrogant, that we know the way, the truth, and the life. And nobody else has a corner on Jesus like we do, especially our church.
Well, we have special revelation,
Yeah, and I love how in your book you talked about how spirituality was something that you started to awaken to in some ways, that spirituality wasn't contained in some sort of a religious box or within a denomination, but within all of life. All of life is spiritual. And it seemed like you experienced that, especially when you went to South America and when you opened up different avenues of seeking God beyond what you've been handed. What was that like for you?
Yeah, and I kind of, again, I had stumbled into all of this. I had a partner who was Buddhist. And I knew some about Buddhism, but I didn't know anything really, and learned a lot through her just about spirituality and the way she thought about it. She'd grown up Catholic, so she was very familiar, went to Catholic schools, and so she was very familiar with the whole Christian story and symbols and meaning and all those sorts of things. So we could converse about those things, but she had no interest in an organization or a way of being that was so confined and so constricted. I think that's what sort of intrigued me initially, I think. And then I had a meditation practice that was horrible, just absolutely. I was not good at it. I mean, nobody's really good at it naturally, I don't think. But I tried like many people do, I tried meditation, and then my mind is all over the place. And, I tried for 5 minutes, like, okay, well, did it for that. That's good, kind of thing. But, like any skill, she kind of coached me through, here's what's happening when your mind is doing this. Here's what's happening when your mind's doing that. And that really helped me kind of get over some hurdles with meditation. And once I got more into meditation, I got really intrigued by what's happening in my brain as I meditate, or maybe more accurately, what's happening in my brain when I'm not meditating. And that began opening a lot of questions for me. And I talk a lot about the brain science in the book, of what happens when we meditate and what happens to people who meditate lots, and how literally rewires your brain, and the way that we can train ourselves to sort of calm our minds down and begin to we have this incessant sense of having to do. And what does it mean to be a human being instead of human doing? Just to be and to allow the divine or God or however you want to define it to sort of enter into those moments. And so that became for me then an opening. And in that process of sort of discovering all this, then I heard a podcast with, oh gosh, what is his name? Author who wrote, he wrote a book on psychedelics and
Pollan.
Thank you. Gosh, it must be Monday. I just could not. Michael Pollan's book, which is absolutely, I heard him on a podcast, and then I got the book and just devoured the book, and it's long and it's got tons of information in it. Then I got to the end of it and I thought, I think I need to try mushrooms. And, so again, I grew up evangelical. I didn't drink alcohol till I was in my 30s. I was that good kid, and I still don't smoke weed. I mean, it's legal in my state, but I don't, that's never been a part of my life. But, I just thought I'm going to skip past all that and I'm going to jump right into mushrooms, so that was it. It, of course, freaked out everybody who was close to me. They're like, what are you doing? So, I get online, I try to figure out and the reason I thought it was interesting, I should probably explain why I thought this was interesting. What the process that goes on in your brain in meditation is you're trying to slow down what scientists call the default mode network in your mind. That state of thinking in which you just kind of go into default mode, like when you're driving a car, you're not thinking about now I will put my right foot on the accelerator. You just kind of do it because you've done it so much. You're in this routine. Your mind has it all figured out. When you stop and you're not really doing anything in particular, your mind starts racing on things from the past, things from the future, oh shoot, I've got to pick up a loaf of bread at the store or whatever, and you're not really fully present. But in meditation, you begin to shut down that default mode network so you can just be fully present in this moment. What they find out with some psychedelics like DMT and psilocybin, which is magic mushrooms, is that it shuts down that default mode network so that you can be so fully present in where you're at right then. And it just kind of opens up. Spirituality just sort of explodes out of that, because turns out that God is present everywhere and in everything, and we're just too freaking busy to notice it.
So good.
And so when we can shut our minds up just long enough to just be and be still, and maybe sounds like a Bible verse, be still and know that what?
I know the rest of this one. Hang on. Be still and know that the Diamondbacks still suck. No, that's not it. That's fighting words. I apologize. That was rude, and
I would have agreed with you at the end of the season, but
you didn't. You didn't deserve that. I apologize. But it's interesting though, because that default mode, that thing, and this is just a curiosity. This is how my brain functions. This is some of what I experienced when I was deeply into sort of charismatic, sort of what's the word I'm looking for, but almost ecstatic church services. I'd be very interested to see like a brain scan of somebody on LSD doing that, and somebody in one of those places, like, are they having the same?
It's not a binary thing. Yeah, I mean, there's degrees of which this happens, of course. And what we find is that sometimes in group contexts, it's easier to sort of get into that mindset.
Sure,
and a great example of that is actually like a sporting event, right?
Oh yeah,
everybody's into it. We're all in this together, and we're totally focused on what's going on the field. We're not thinking about like next week. We're not thinking about yesterday. We are here in this moment present, as this thing is happening. So sometimes it's the group dynamic that can bring that about. Art and music. Sometimes, you watch a beauty. We watch the sunset over the ocean, moments. You watch the birth of a child, there's these transcendent sort of moments that sweep us up, and it's as if time stands still, and we lose this whole sense of time and place sometimes. And that's what's happening in the default mode network, is we have a real clear sense of time. But when we're in these moments of awe and beauty and wonder, I would call them moments of spirituality, then we sort of time becomes kind of a relative thing, and we lose our sense of that. And so this is what happens on mushrooms too, of course, and I write in the book that the second time I went to Mexico on my second mushroom trip, it was a heavy dose, and I had a sitter, a woman who was there to make sure that I didn't do anything weird, or leave the room. So, because that's how people get hurt on mushrooms. You can't overdose on them, but if you're hallucinating and you walk into traffic, it's just not a good thing, So she was there to kind of make sure I didn't leave the room, and I took I had blinders on and blindfold. And I took the blindfold off, and I asked her, I said, how long has it been? And she said, it's been like 3 hours. And I said, and then she said, does it seem like it's been longer? And I just remember at the time thinking, what a stupid question. Like, what is time? It's like, what is time as a concept? I mean, this is like this social construct we made up, right? And it was so evident to me that was just such a dumb question, at the time, as I was tripping. But that's what happens when our default mode network is shut out, is that we lose that whole track of sense of time and place and where we're at. So anyway, I kind of got off on a rabbit trail on that, but yeah, I took mushrooms is the bottom line on it. And
that would have been a good title for the book. I took mushrooms and other musings.
Well, I have a friend who said that whenever he does mushrooms, it feels like he is rummaging through God's sock drawer. This sense of like,
nice.
What is hidden that isn't always revealed. And I'm wondering about like, what Nat was saying about the charismatic, and, you're using this example of a big sporting event. And I wonder how much these sorts of experiences are supposed to be connecting in one way or another. Like, when you're at a big sporting event, everybody feels like they're in it together. Like they help the team win, and everybody cheers and high fives. You high five strangers. You feel like super connected.
Exactly. We did it.
Yeah, totally. And so I'm kind of curious, when it comes to, a mushroom or psilocybin sort of experience, do you feel a greater connectedness to God or to yourself?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And I think that's one of the most profound sort of experiences, is this sort of dissolution of the barriers between myself and other people, and with creation, and with God, and with, everything. You sort of those things just sort of dissolve, and on heavier doses of psilocybin. And it can be pretty disorienting, to say the least, for people. I was expecting it. And I kind of wanted to experience it the second time around. That's why I kind of went for that. But I could see where it'd be extremely disorienting for people. When you lose your sense of self, and you begin to experience me, whatever that means, apart from my sense of self, it's hard to explain, and with the vocabulary that we have, it's pretty limiting. But then when you come out of that, there is this deep connection of like, what I do matters to not just me, but to others, that we're all interrelated in this. We're all in the same swimming pool together. And, you can't pee on your side of the pool and it not affect, other people. And that's just not how it works, right? We're in this together. And so that's, again, John, getting back to the whole ethical thing, right? It's like, why? And Buddhists would say this, why would I wouldn't harm the guy down the street, because it'd be the same as like, why would I cut off my own arm? That doesn't make any sense, or even to the sense, even to a broader context of like, why would I contribute to a world in which I'm destroying the planet in which I live on? It's like, this is all part of us. Like, we're going to move to another planet? Come on. I mean, this is us. This is all part of us. And so there becomes this ethical sort of imperative that comes and it's not like, oh, I have to do it. It's like, duh, we're all connected,
Well, and you see in the evangelical church, you see the opposite, right?
Mm-hmm.
That because of some weird prophetic future for us where we're all going to the great by and by, that, we can say, I don't give a damn about this planet because this isn't my home.
Right.
And that's some scary shit.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's very escapist, There's a lot of that language that we all grew up with. That was, one of my least favorite, songs we'd sing in churches, I'll Fly Away, because it just literally is all about, one fine day when this dreary, shitty life is over, then it'll all be, and then we also grew up in the, in the shadow of, Hal Lindsey's Late Great Planet Earth, and, much later the Left Behind horseshit. And so the future was always dismal, but something to be traversed in order to get to the other side, so that then, if you were good, and if you stayed the course and if you were faithful, then the reward was there. But it's such a strange, I'm going to remember for a long time the peeing in the pool analogy, because that's just perfect.
Yeah. It really is.
Because that is one of the things I've noticed about, again, the strain of Christianity that I was raised in. And it's not limited to them. So I don't mean to pick on evangelicals. I just am one. And so I feel best qualified to critique my own people. But I'm sure it's an American thing as much as it is a church thing. And it is that hyper fixation on individualism, individuality.
For sure.
Yeah. Jesus is my personal savior. And this idea that somehow we are not all interconnected. Somehow we are not all dependent on one another. And I see that the more distance I get from the church, the more from the structured church, I start to see the difference. And I see in the question, like that John asked you, okay, well, without God and without the threat of hell and without all this, how do you have morals? It's the same question that I hear asked of my atheist friends. It's the same question I hear asked of people who maybe adhere more to like a secular humanist philosophy. And they're like, well, without, objective truth and objective whatever, how do you have any moral code? And they're like, because we all swim in the same fucking pool.
Yeah.
I don't need that. There's your moral imperative. How about we not burn the planet down? How about we not make life, more difficult for the people that we love and care about?
Yeah, and it's pretty telling to me too. I think it says more about the people that ask the question too.
Oh yeah.
When they say, yeah, the only thing that's keeping me from not murdering and raping my neighbors
is the pesky commandment.
Is that stupid? Is God might send me to hell someday.
Otherwise, man,
all bets are off.
You remember Penn Jillette, the Penn and Teller, I think Penn Jillette said something along the lines of, without a moral code, you could rape and murder all you want. And he's like, I do rape and murder all I want. It just turns out it turns out I want to not at all. And so, yes, I do all of that I want to do. And it just turns out I don't want to. And if what you need is something to bar you from, that makes me wonder about your character. Like, all that's holding you back is this one little law. And like, better thank your lucky stars. There's a commandment there, or I would be, I'd be all about that.
And I think, and this just gets to, I remember back in my seminary days taking that course on moral development, and then this is just all part of it, right? For a child, you'll tell a child, don't do that, or I'll spank you, or I'll put you in timeout, or whatever it is, punish you in some way. And so the child's motivation is, I'm not gonna go outside and play in the street or whatever, because I know that I'll be in trouble or get punished or whatever. And that becomes their motivation. At some point, you hope that the child will be motivated on their own to do the right thing, right? But so really, when people say that, it shows their own stunted sense of morality, and again, I'll quote the Bible again. Paul says, when I was a child, I thought like a child and I reasoned like a child. When I became an adult, I put away childish things. And this is exactly the kind of childish thing that people don't put behind them, is this sort of, that morality is about punishment, or avoidance of punishment.
Yeah, it's all about the carrot and the stick. And it turns out the stick is more often the motivator than even the carrot. It's the threat of hell versus the promise of heaven. But as Peter Enns would say, prohibition is a terrible motivator. It's really not. It doesn't work. So just putting something off limits and saying thou shalt not, with the promise of some future possible punishment. I mean, it doesn't stop people from doing stuff, or we wouldn't have courts that were full of Christians who commit crimes. Sorry. You're not immune from all of this. We're all doing the same stupid shit. I have a question though for you, because I love the title of your book, and it reminds me of a conversation that I've had with a pastor friend of mine. So talk about thin places, because I have my own concept of what that is, but I don't want to interject that over what you might be saying.
Yeah, the phrase "thin places" comes out of Celtic spirituality, and it's this sort of notion that we encounter sometimes people or places or events in our lives in which the veil between God and earth seems paper thin, and they are thin places, is what they would call them. And so that's really, when I talk about the quest for thin places, I'm saying how do we create environments in which, because I think what the thing beneath the thing for a lot of us, people who ascribe to, and this is who I wrote the book to, people that ascribe to this idea that they're spiritual but not religious. I understand what they're saying. I think I understand what they're saying, that they're not really interested in an institution and what the institution has to offer, but there's something about they're interested in transcendence, they're interested in awe, they're interested in beauty, they're interested in wonder, those sorts of things that are sort of at the heart of spirituality. And when we find thin places, we find those sorts of things, transcendence and awe and beauty and wonder, that sort of take us into other sorts of experiences. And I think that's really one of the deepest desires of the human soul. And we try to fill that, I think, with institutions, or institutions come along to try to manufacture that and get money off of that, but Fair. But it's the thing that we really are looking for are not really institutions. The thing we're really looking for are thin places.
Yeah.
Those moments, right? Those moments where you through sometimes no work of your own, you connect to the divine. And I think anyone who has sought the divine in any way or shape or form truthfully has had these moments. I can think of a couple for myself. Even though I consider myself agnostic, I can still talk about these spiritual moments where I feel like the veil was thin and my connection or my being in the presence of the divine was amazing.
Well, and I wonder if some of those thin spaces can be cultivated through meditation, through those sorts of experiences where you're able to pay attention to the childlike wonder that is all around you, to recognize that is something that is happening all the time. We just don't really know how to tap into it unless we take the space to do so.
That's exactly it. Yeah, that was exactly my experience. And once I had small glimpses of that through my meditation practice, but when my first experience on psilocybin, I remember we were outside, we were in a jungle in Mexico, and there was this plant, and I remember looking at this plant and just thinking to myself, that is the most stunning color purple I've ever seen in my entire life. I mean, it was just like I couldn't take my eyes off of it. It was just like so beautiful. It was just like overwhelmingly beautiful, and I couldn't believe it. And so I dug around, I found my phone, and I took a picture of it, because I always want to remember this amazing color I saw that I just couldn't even put into words. And then a couple days later, I'm looking through my reel and I find this picture and I'm like, why did I take this? I mean, it's a flower, you know? I mean, what's the deal? You know, I mean, it wasn't anything that exciting, you know? But again, I just had a different lens for which I was seeing it, you know? It was the same experience. But that's like anything, right? You know, it's not necessarily having a different experience. It's having the same experience with a different lens.
Yeah.
And being able to see that. And I think that's true of spirituality as well. And I think that was one of the wake-up moments for me too, was kind of recognizing, oh, the divine isn't like out there somewhere. It's everywhere. And it permeates everything. And you just got to have the eyes to see it.
No, totally.
Well, that opens yourself up to being more accepting of other religions too.
Oh,
and knowing that they have a connection to the divine that works. Maybe, you know, and I mean, I consider myself more a Buddhist than I would a Christian at this point in my life. That's one thing I did appreciate in your book is that you talk about different religions. You talk about Hinduism, you talk about Taoism, you talk about Buddhism. Were these religions that you sought after, or was just stuff that you found as you were searching?
Yeah, the Buddhist thing, I think I mentioned my Buddhist connection, you know, so that became, I think, my first foray into that. And then as I was researching for the book, I mean, you know, there's mystical traditions in all these major religions, you know, so, and they have a common thread in terms of the language they use and the, you know, how they sort of talk about, you know, the oneness of everything, the oneness of humanity, those sorts of things. And so people who are having religious or mystical experiences, no matter what your religious beliefs are, and I'm not sure you got to this part or yet, John, or not. I think one of the most interesting pieces to me of the whole psilocybin thing is what ends up happening. So they found that so Johns Hopkins University is doing tons of research on psilocybin, magic mushrooms, and its effects and, you know, how to use it in a therapeutic sense. There's lots of application for that. We're at the tip of the iceberg of what that's going to look like, I think, going into the future. But one of the ways they're using it is for terminal cancer patients who have tons of anxiety about dying. And so they would give them these doses of psilocybin, and then they would interview them afterwards and talk to them about it. And for the majority of them, for the vast majority of them, they said, that was the greatest spiritual experience of my life. It just blew my mind, you know, and I no longer, and the vast majority of them said, I no longer have any sense of anxiety about dying anymore. And I think the reason for that, they don't explain it in this thing, but I think what ends up happening is once you get a sense of your own oneness with the universe, you realize that if this illusion of selfhood disappears, it's fine. It's still me in some sense of the word, you know, that I exist apart from this, you know, kind of thing. But one of the other interesting insights about it is that not everybody that they administered the psilocybin to were people who believed in God. There were atheists that they did. And so they would interview them and say, tell us about your experience. And this one woman says, yeah, you know, I was just bathed in the love of the universe, and like this presence, like God came over me. And they said, well, we thought you were an atheist. And she was like, yeah, I don't know what it was. Okay. But like this presence, it came over me, you know,
like back off, man.
Yeah. And it's interesting, the researcher, and this was one of my favorite quotes, I think, of all the research I did. The researcher in this particular study wrote in his things, once you've dove into the ocean, it doesn't really matter or not whether or not you believe in water. And that was sort of the experience of these atheists who were on psilocybin, you know. Who had these deeply profound religious experiences.
Well, and at that point, you can have that experience. I think you might even be in some ways, I mean, you could be at an advantage because you maybe aren't encumbered by all the language that you might want to apply to all of it. And
Right.
say, and you could just say, well, I don't know what this was. And I can just maybe you could just be more present without trying to analyze it too critically,
Right.
too
How does
deeply.
this fit into my paradigm of my theology? Yeah.
Well, and the thing is, I've seen physicists like Neil deGrasse Tyson and others wax poetic about the universe, and how it might potentially be infinite. We don't know. You could take the most hardcore, astrophysicist who will at some point have to admit, before the Big Bang, I don't know, and nobody does, because we don't know that was the beginning of time as far as they're concerned. What was there before? It may have always been, and so if that's what you want to call God, okay. I don't have a better word for it, but there is still that sense of wonder about the immensity of it all. And then also about the interconnectedness of all of this, because we are all essentially made of the same matter. And maybe that's a part of that, maybe that's a form of reincarnation I can kind of get behind. From stardust we were born, to stardust we will return. And maybe, who we are just continues on. I don't know, but I don't know. To me, that's very, very cool. I had a thin place the reason I brought that up is because there's a sanctuary, a little chapel, in this retreat center that I think it's largely because of just the connections I've made in that place. And so even now, I could walk in that place tomorrow and it would be like, whew, like it would just, you know what I mean? Like it would just, like it would, so I was talking to my pastor friend about that, and he goes, "Oh yeah, that's a thin place." I'm like, "Ooh, I like that." And so that's exactly what, like I said, I wasn't sure exactly what you meant by that, but that was what it triggered in my memory was, that it, didn't have to be that physical place, but there were connections made there. There was a sense that when I was in that place that I was supposed to strive to be present. Like that was the point. Like, hey, we're to the very best of our ability. We're going to try and not think about the past and not think about the future, not worry about what's to come. We are just in a very meditative way trying to be here right now. And when you do that often enough, I think you begin to make those connections even in your own mind. And so, to me, then here's that question: is that something that we could cultivate for ourselves and say, hey, I'd like to have maybe even a physical place where I could go and I couldn't necessarily meditate in my office, but maybe in this place I could. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, like anything, it takes practice, right? And intentionality. I mean, these kind of things don't just happen, and the last few chapters of the book, I try to focus on that. It's like, okay, so here's the mechanics of it, but how do we like make this a thing? And I think that's one of the upsides to a spiritual community, is that we become intentional about practicing that, and so I think a spiritual community can be helpful in that regard, in that, just like when I don't feel like going to the gym, but if my buddy Bob is going to be there and I told him I'd be there, well, I'll go, kind of thing. And it's good for me, and I'm glad I went.
Right.
But I probably wouldn't have gone if Bob, I hadn't told Bob I was going to be there, kind of thing, It's same principle, different thing, right? Sometimes the spiritual community helps with that, but like anything too, I learned as a good evangelical, how to develop habits to do my devotions every morning or whatever, and so I just took that into my new spirituality, and I have a routine now, where I get up and I drink my coffee and then I meditate, and it's not long, 15, 20 minutes, but long enough to where I feel like my brain has settled down and I feel a lot calmer throughout the day, and I feel more centered. I feel like I think a lot better throughout the day as I do that.
Speaking of that process of meditating, if someone was to ask you where's a good place to start on learning how to do that, especially being intentional on meditating, someone who is seeking that kind of oneness or that kind of connection, or those, connecting to those thin places, what would be your answer to that for them?
Yeah. In one of the appendixes of the book, I list some resources for meditation. I use a meditation app, and there's several of them out there, and they all seem to be, they have little training things, guided meditation. Some people, it really helps them to have a guided meditation, like, okay, now let go of your thoughts, kind of thing. And I did those for a while. After a while, they began to drive me crazy and I quit listening to them. But, a little too airy and whatnot. But now I just I use the app, but I just use there's a timer on it, and so like it can play like a background sound that's soothing, and then at the end of the whatever the sounds a bell, so that you know how long it's time to stop now and go to work, So there's books out there, obviously, and what's interesting, you asked me about meditation. I really feel like I'm a beginner. I really do. There's so much to it in terms of like layers of nuance and depth that I've never experienced. I know enough to know that I'm not an expert at this, but I may be a couple steps further down the path than some folks, and so I think part of it is recognizing that it's not easy. I think especially for Americans who are constantly on their phones, 24/7, we're used to like stimulation all the time. And the minute we start to get bored, it's like, where's my phone? And we're getting more and more. So I think that creates, or it trains our minds to not be very good at slowing down enough to really meditate. So it just takes time. And I wish there was a shortcut to it. Well, actually, there is a little bit of a shortcut, and that's mushrooms. But if you're going to do mushrooms, I give all kinds of disclaimers in the book. It's illegal in most places. Be careful. Don't blame me. I'd also be cautious about who you get mushrooms from and who's your guide in it. I went to Mexico, well, first because it's not illegal there, and also because they have several thousand years of traditions of using what they call the little saints, or the Niños Santos. And so they have a whole ritual around it, and they understand how to create a context for it to be a healing environment. And as opposed to like, hey, let's go watch the Grateful Dead and drop some shrooms, kind of thing. That's a whole different kind of experience. So what your intention is going into it makes a big difference in terms of your experience. But if you go into it with spirituality as your intention, if you go into it into a context where you have somebody who's a good guide, you can have a really positive sort of spiritual experience. And then frankly, my experience with mushrooms then got me to understand it and figure out like, oh, this is what it's like when my default mode network's completely shut off. I can kind of come back to that. Now there's a little muscle memory to that. And I can't quite have the same experience as the mushrooms, but I can certainly silence my mind a lot more easily now, just because I can visualize it and imagine it of what that was like.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. If you don't even really have a frame of reference to what that's, because I've never done it. So I don't know in my entire 50 years of life, I don't think I've ever shut that off. It's going constantly.
Yeah. Well, you probably have. I mean, and again, like, you're at a sporting event and it's 4th and goal at the 3-yard line and there's 4 seconds left in the game and you're watching and you're leaning in, right? You're not thinking about like, hey, what I got to do at work tomorrow?
There's where you're wrong. I'm totally. I'm going. Did I send that email? Son of a bitch! I forgot.
So I mean, we have those moments.
No, you're 100% right. No,
completely engrossed in play or in whatever, and we're not thinking about other things.
It's weirdly, it's the only thing I miss about that part of my religious heritage, which is steeped deeply in ecstatic experiences and charismatic type stuff. So I understand. I have a better context for what it is now, and later on in my life, I felt very manipulated by it, and so I pushed back against a lot of it. It felt very manufactured. With some distance now, I go. And now, given the context that you've just given us, I go, oh, that was the attraction, at least partially, because those were the handful of times in my life when I wasn't thinking about anything except what was happening right now. And to the extent that part of it was genuine, that was helpful. There were other contexts given it that I don't think were as helpful, but it's an interesting thing. I really also enjoyed, and this is going back to just the deconstruction part of all of this. I spent a lot of time looking at the graphic that you produced and the way that the book is organized. I appreciated that. Yeah, because I think John and Bethany and I have talked about this a bunch now. We all now see this process as cyclical.
Yeah.
And so I like that you go, hey, we're going to go through this. And then you don't stop when you get back to the top again. You go, no, we're just waiting for the next time. We're going to have to rethink some stuff.
The people that stop become fundamentalists again.
Yes, they just become different.
But fundamentalists of a different sort. Right. Of a different brand. Yeah. And I've seen that a lot, like in, they'll leave conservative Christianity, deconstruct, and become a progressive Christian and become just as fundamentalist about their progressive Christianity as they were about their conservative Christianity. Yeah,
100%. We saw this early on with people who were, before we even had talked about deconstruction, but people who had maybe were starting a deconstruction of sorts, but like going really, really deep into grace. And so grace. And all of a sudden, and then they got to a point where like, okay, I'm not peeling back any more layers. This is where I landed. And then they got very exclusive and they got very narrow and started like keeping people out based on their understanding of what grace was. And so, yeah, you're exactly right. If all you're doing is moving your camp to another location and building different walls and pissing in that pool, I still like that analogy an awful lot. I guess.
Well, and it reminds me, and you've brought this up before, it reminds me again of what Bio said, right?
Yeah. Like that reconstruction thing, if you're not careful, you just rebuild the same thing you had before. It'll look different, maybe superficially, but structurally it won't be that much different. And so, and I found this out with the first church the first and only church that I planted, where we had all kinds of grandiose ideas about how we were going to do church different. And we didn't because we didn't know how to do it different. I mean, it was better. Don't get me wrong. There were things about it that were absolutely better, but structurally, at the end of the day, it was still almost indistinguishable from the churches that we all left. So we needed to like completely re-envision what it looks like. But we're all at some point we're all still captive to our own experiences and our own, the ways that we can imagine things. But dude, but this is awesome, and I really appreciate the way that you've talked about these things and your boldness to talk about things that, honestly, even 2 or 3 years ago, I would have been like, what are we talking about? We're talking about
me too. I was really hesitant to put it out in the world. It's like, kind of pushing some boundaries here for some folks. But I've been surprised at the number of people. In fact, I just got an email yesterday I was on a different podcast and guy was like, hey, I heard that. Who do you recommend in Mexico, man? I want to go down there.
Yeah. I'm actually kind of close to Mexico. So are you, obviously. So I'm thinking, so where did you go? Yeah, where did you go in Mexico? I'm like an hour and a half from the border, man. Let's roll.
The first time I went to Cancun area. Okay. And the second time went down to Puerto Vallarta. And so there are different experiences. The first one was more of a group experience. There was 9 of us in the group, and we went out in nature, and so that was kind of an interesting thing. And that was. I had kind of a medium dose of psilocybin at that one, and that was a really good positive experience. But the next one, I really wanted to go really deep, and so I found somebody that would essentially did a solo session by myself, and I put blindfold on and some headphones on, and they piped through some music, and I took a heavy dose, and that was intense, but it was good. It was really positive.
John and I have there's a friend of the podcast who, he was one of the first people I heard talk about this. It was 2-3 years ago at least, but he's a former pro football player who suffers from traumatic brain injury and PTSD and all this other. I mean, it's just years in the NFL, did a number on his head. And so he's been, for the last couple of years, had been microdosing psilocybin. as a way to combat suicidal thoughts and, all kinds of other stuff that was going on. It's like, it's the only thing that's helped him. And it has over time, he believes, and I think the science will begin to back this up, but I think he's begun to like build new neural pathways even. And he's finding ways
for sure. And this is the big thing that why there's so much therapeutic promise in this. It's almost like, and they're using MDMA a lot for PTSD stuff
and ketamine,
and ketamine, because it allows you to sort of like talk about and think about the experience without the emotion attached to it, and then you can just process it and talk about it, and you literally makes new neural pathways, in your mind. It's really pardon the pun, it's mind-blowing.
I will not pardon the pun. I will, however, embrace it and applaud it. That was an excellent pun. Man, I tell you what, as always, I think we could keep talking and talking and talking, but we want to be respectful of everybody's time. And man, I feel like we just scratched the surface, and I feel like we left a lot of meat on the bone for those of you who have stuck it out and endured my rambling anyway, to go buy the book. I think this is going to be one of those things that goes on your shelf and really helps you.
I hope so.
Look at things a little differently. And I know that was Dana's intention here was to get us to perhaps shift our perspective a little bit on this. And applause for that. I think you did a really good job, man.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
I think that's a good place to wrap up. John, Bethany, you have any final thoughts before we say goodnight?
I was just thinking of the story of a reporter meeting with Mother Teresa, and he asked her, like, and I'm sure you'll have heard this before, but like, he asked her in an interview, "What do you say when you pray?" And she replied, "Nothing, I just listen." And the reporter asked, "Well, then what does God say to you?" And she said, "Nothing, God just listens." And I think that is such a beautiful picture of meditation where there's a picture of listening, both to yourself and to the divine, recognizing that it isn't contained in a religious setting or an institution, which Jesus came to critique highly, but really it contains within that interconnectedness, that acknowledgement of God's acceptance and love. And I think that your book is beautiful with that, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you. That's very kind of you to say. Thank you, Bethany.
Yeah, I don't have much to add except thank you very much for coming on and talking with us again. It's been a great conversation. The book is amazing. I recommend it to everybody that they should pick it up. They won't be disappointed in what you have written. That's for sure.
Well, I appreciate that. Well, I always enjoy the conversation, guys. And Bethany, it was great to meet you and have you part of this as well. So thank you so much, guys. Appreciate it.
You betcha.
Thank you for listening to This Is Not Church. Be sure to rate and review the podcast on your platform of choice. If you would like to partner with us, visit patreon.com/thisisnotchurch, where you will receive exclusive content such as early access to episodes, videos of upcoming episodes, and live Q&A sessions. Be sure to check out our Facebook group or follow us on Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the show notes. We'll be back soon with another episode.